This coming Monday, my family will be finally celebrating the life of my grandmother who passed away a few weeks ago. She lived a good, long life of 93 years, and I'm convinced that she'd have been around for much longer had she not been battling cancer. For years, though, Nana had been one who was always trying to give away some of the things that she'd had. My brother and I could never visit without walking away with something of hers, whether it was something we really wanted or not. She insisted and rarely took no for an answer. And some of the things were just random trinkets that she'd collected over the years. Others, she'd tell us, were worth, as she put it, real money. As she was transitioning toward the end of her life, my family found ourselves tasked with sorting through her things left in her small apartment, deciding what to keep and what she'd bring to the hospital room that she'd eventually pass in, and what we could let go of. Now, there were, packed in that tiny space, tons of boxes that we were dodging, and we had to scoot around large trash bins, searching every cabinet and closet, perusing both knickknacks and the real money stuff. I was amazed while we were doing that by all of the stuff that she'd hidden away in just a few closets. But simultaneously, I was surprised by how little was actually there as well. In the past, this life milestone of going through the belongings of a loved one happened after their death, in the wake of the loss and pain of grief. I remember when my great uncle passed away, going through his house was a much different experience. Boxes stacked from basement floor to ceiling, and several other rooms full as well, all filled with things picked up along the way in a life well lived. Now, I was a lot younger back when we'd gone through Uncle George's house, and I hadn't lived enough life to really understand how so many things could accumulate over time. Back then, to me, it was all just boxes, and several days spent sorting out things with stories and memories attached to them that had passed on with my great uncle and left voiceless. With Nana, though, it was a little different. She was still there. Her and my dad went through things in advance as she was able, and it's something that I imagine was pretty difficult for her. For decades, it was her things that kept her company. There were stories and memories of her 93 years wrapped all into what she had. Photos and trinkets and all manner of things that she'd acquired over the years that had special meaning to her. It was all these things that we were now going through. Some came with Cassie and I to our apartment. Some ended up in my parents' garage. A lot ended up being given away too, and some was just thrown out. A lot of stuff had been moved. And when we visited her a few days later, I was convinced that she was going to be asking about a lot of the stuff, wondering where it went, trying to make sure that it was in the right place or somewhere appropriate, or even mourning that she didn't have the space in her tiny hospital room to keep everything that she wanted. But surprisingly, that was the farthest thing from what actually occurred. During our visit, she was just focused on those of us there, chatting about our lives and talking about the wonderful view out her window. She asked how the cleaning had gone, but wasn't concerned with it too much, adamant in the mindset that none of it could come with her when she passed on. She was at peace. She'd made room for what was in store just 2 weeks later. Now, 2 weeks ago from this time, we wrapped up our fall book study read of the book Claiming Resurrection in the Dying Church, Freedom Beyond Survival. It was a challenging read for all and a liberating one for many. And the very first chapter of this book was titled Making Room. Reverend Anna Olson, the author, writes about her experience within a dying church as it discerns what comes next. The first step, making room for the future. It started with cleaning out their church building. That was the first step, and in doing so, they freed up space for whatever God had in store for them, not even knowing what God had in store for them. On this work, Reverend Olson said, "We keep things because we're afraid of empty spaces. Empty space demands faith. But when there is no empty space to be had, surprisingly little can happen." That cleaning also occurs on a different level, on a deeper level. The things we hold on to are our connections to what has happened in our lives. They act as talismans that invoke times gone by, times of joy that are the foundations of who and where we are today. The things that make us who we understand ourselves to be. Sometimes to clean these things away feels like cleaning away who we are, or cleaning away what was. Overcoming this feeling is often quite difficult. Sometimes we hold on, trying to see the future first so that we can determine whether it's worth making room for. But not making room, not doing so, keeps us from moving forward in life and experiencing what is yet to come. And the season of Advent offers us help in this spiritual work. The beginning of the church calendar year is a season in which we anticipate what can happen. We anticipate and celebrate the advent of hope, peace, joy, and love in the world in the form of Christ. For these things to enter the world and to take root, though, there needs to be some preparational work done. Room needs to be made. Though our scripture passages today aren't in reference to Jesus, they offer those of us who are focused on Christ a mindset in which we can begin to make room for Christ. Jeremiah reminds us of an approaching moment. It's vague, it's unclear, but it's on a distant horizon that is waiting to be realized. As we learned last week, those whom Jeremiah speaks to have decades ahead of them until their time of exile comes to an end and their hopes become a reality. Psalm 25 prompts us to be open to what is coming, to allow ourselves to open ourselves, and to trust in the ways in which God is working to reveal that moment that is not yet here. Making room can be a very scary thing to do. Sorting through what is, discerning what to keep and what to move on from is deeply emotional work. Even more so when that sorting happens on that deeper soul level. Discerning what exists within us that might have to be transformed or let go of in order to make room for what God has next for us. But when we make room, when we make space for our own growth, we are able to grow. We find larger pots, new chapters in which we can grow and sink our roots even deeper within and find renewal along the way. It may take time and patience, and the hardest part is finding the courage to just surrender and start. But in doing so, making that choice to free up space within us and say, okay, God, what's next? That is how we continue onward through life. Now, in thinking back to my grandmother, she had a choice. She could have chosen to hold on to the things in which she'd stored the treasured memories of a life well lived. She could have clung to them, given in to the feeling that letting them go would have been like letting a part of herself go, or letting go of all that she held dear. But instead of all that, she chose to make room. She chose to look back on all that she had, to reminisce and reflect on all the good. She chose to tell stories and share memories made across her 93 years of life. And then she chose to move forward, only taking with her her Bible, a rosary, pictures of her family, and a hairbrush, all that she needed for the next steps in her journey. A journey she was no longer fighting because she'd made room for something new. So, as we begin our Advent journey this year, anticipating the coming of Christ, how might we make room for something new? How might we, in our individual lives, in the discernment work of our church, and in this season of hope, peace, joy, and love, find ways to let go of what we no longer need and prepare ourselves for a journey toward renewal? How might we begin to make room within our spirits, within our spaces, and within our hearts, so that hope for a good future, for something new, something that is surely good, can actually take root?